Hey guys, sorry for the delay. I've been going through some tough emotional battles along with keeping up with my schoolwork, and I have to finish a game I just started making by February on top of that. I just wanted to make a video to apologize for my Lair Review Rant. My points were not clear and at times inaccurate. Some of my statements were grossly inappropriate, and now several people look at me as a condescending douchebag as a result of the video. I just want to clarify a few things. I don't look down on people. I feel it's wrong to do so, and to be honest, I actually have very low self-esteem, so I was quite surprised when I saw comments classifying me as something I generally oppose. What I'm going to do is clarify a few things and present my argument in a more calm and respectful manner. Though before I do, I just want to say this. I have moved on. I still love the game. I play it like crazy. I just ignore the reviews and rely on my own judgment, and it helps knowing that I'm not the only person to like this game. Look at a bunch of the user reviews on IGN and at some of the forums on GameFAQs. A lot of people who do give it a chance do end up liking it. And I've also heard some valid complaints about it this way too, but I'll get to that in a second. Many of you think I'm against people not liking Lair. I'm not. That would be incredibly stupid and hypocritical, especially considering how much I've complained about how many Ocarina of Time fanboys can be that close-minded. No, I am perfectly fine with people not liking the game. Nothing in existence appeals to everyone. I just think you should try to back up your side as best you can, no matter what side you're on of any argument, really. That's just my advice. I'm not perfect at doing that, but I'm willing to admit when I'm in the wrong. Plus, as a programmer myself, I can say that no game is perfect. Lair is not flawless. It does have its issues, and I'm not afraid to point them out. However, I can easily say that most of the critics really made this game appear to be worse than it actually is. Actually, Greg Miller's review is one of the only honest Lair reviews I've seen. And unlike some of the others, I can clearly tell that Greg at least played the game. It's not like X-Play's review, where they literally made up most of the flaws they were talking about. So where did all of that anger come from? Well, I'm a huge Factor 5 fan, and this game is one of the major things that put them out of business. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, it bombed hard. It was the first in the lineup of several PS3 exclusives trying to show what the system can do. There weren't too many notable exclusives before that. Therefore, many people didn't have PS3, so they didn't want to be suckered in, especially because of how expensive the system was. So when Lair was released, several people looked at the reviews to see if they should get a PS3 in order to play the game or not. So when the critics posted their reviews, there really wasn't too much opposition. Something that really doesn't make much sense about this is when the press played the game before its release, they praised the 6-axis controls, talking about how accurate and smooth they were.
Having played Lair, I feel that it's one of the games that really takes advantage of the 6-axis in a good way and really makes it feel like a solid thing. How hard was it to work with the motion sensor, and how much time did that take?
Thanks for the compliment.
It was only after the IGN review that people started bashing it and got the hate. It becomes blatant that most of the critics jumped on the bandwagon in order to maintain popularity, and some simply did it to contribute to PS3 hate. In some cases, they copy each other word for word because they don't have any real complaints of their own. It's absolutely disgusting. Hardly anyone gave the game a chance, and Lair became the punchline of several bad jokes. Though the thing that really got me mad is how much effort Factor 5 put into this game, and how that effort is totally ignored. I've not only looked at the unlockable documentaries and audio commentaries in the game, but I've also looked at several interviews about it, and I just need to say, the guys at Factor 5 really worked their asses off. Though it's not my favorite game by them, it's really the game they put the most effort into. And looking at it from a developer standpoint, it's actually very well made, especially when considering how ambitious it is. There are quite a few glitches, but overall it's programmed well and designed brilliantly. The guys at Factor 5 did everything that they needed to do, and yet they lost their jobs because people simply can't think for themselves. Now, you're probably thinking about how even I said the controls took some time to get used to. Well, it depends on who you are. I've seen people get into the game immediately. The reason it can take a little while to get used to is because the controls are unique. there really isn't too much to compare them to. It's not that the controls are bad, they're actually incredibly precise. From what I have observed from watching many of my friends play this game, that it usually takes around 5 minutes to get used to them, if any time at all. But I gotta say, it took me a lot longer to get used to the Wii than it took me to get Lair. I mean, yeah, Lair took me like 5 minutes, where the Wii took me like a day. I actually have a pretty slow processing speed, so that contributes. Now, before I get into it, I just wanted to establish this. I don't hate Greg Miller. That would be stupid. I don't know him. I've never been in any contact with him. I can't judge him as a human being, as wrong as that would be to begin with. I just don't like his videos. Why? Well, because of how he presents himself. He comes off as pretty egomaniacal, and I just find it really irritating when he shuts out the opinions of others, basically telling us how to think and describing himself in a vastly superior manner. Again, I don't know him. He could be an entirely different person off camera. He could just be trying to be the fun guy at the party. I don't know. Admittedly, I've said some pretty douchey things too. If you take a long look at his complaints, you should be able to determine that the flaw isn't necessarily with the motion controls as much as it is with the lock-on system. And yes, the lock-on controls aren't perfect. This is how it works. You aim your dragon at your targets beforehand. Then a white circle will appear around the target you're pointed at. If you see the white circle around your target, you'll know that if you press the lock-on buttons, you'll lock onto that target. Once you press L1 and R1, the circle around the target will become red, and your dragon will follow it, allowing you to attack it in various ways depending on what target it is. Though with some enemies like the Toros, you'll automatically fly right for them once you lock onto them. The only problem is that it can be a bit disorienting at times. To be more specific, you'll always lock onto the target you're pointed at versus the target you're closest to. So in the end, you really have to aim your dragon directly at your targets if you want to lock onto them. It's not perfect, but hey, at least it works. Plus, the focus of his complaints revolved around how he had so much trouble locking onto the Toros. In Lair, there are several ways of attacking your enemies and completing your objectives. When the Toros first arrive, you're told to land and shoot them down with fire. Using the lock-on system to pick them up is presented as the alternative method. So let's look at this from a design standpoint. In this situation, you are given two clear methods of dealing with a situation. A training level that you can go back to at any point in order to learn how the gameplay mechanics work, and detailed descriptions of how the mechanics work, both in the instruction manual and in-game. Not to mention, by this point, the player has had several opportunities to get used to the controls and mechanics in the regular game itself. Taking all that into consideration, if the player is sucking at this point, is it the fault of the developers or the player? It's the player's fault, absolutely. So with that, I really have a hard time seeing how Greg has such hatred towards this part. If you look at his written review, this is literally almost all he talks about. How he can't pick up the Toros and somehow it's the game's fault. Though, that's not to say that developers never screw up in the design department. No. But you just have to really know what you're talking about if you are going to complain about something like this. And if you think I'm saying that this just applies to Greg Miller, you're dead wrong. This is a general statement towards the average modern gamer. Instead of just trying to enjoy what the game has to offer, several people just look at moments in the game that are too hard for them and accuse that of being bad design without looking at the situation in a realistic manner. And to be honest, I used to be like this. However, I became more interested in programming games, took a few classes on it, and I've made little freeware games as a hobby since. Today, I try to be a bit more appreciative as a gamer while taking the pros and cons into consideration in a realistic manner. If you look at some of my more recent reviews, you should see what I mean. Am I saying that everyone should be like me? No. I'm merely stating that if you are complaining about a game in this manner, you should at least look at the whole thing realistically from a developer perspective in order to fairly determine if your statement is valid. Looking at both of his reviews, I seriously and honestly think that Greg Miller didn't spend a lot of time playing this game. From what I read in his review, I think he stopped at Serpent Strait at the earliest and Out of the Ashes at the very latest. It's quite clear to me that he didn't finish the game. I could be horribly mistaken, but the points he gives really lead me to believe that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that these critics have around a week to do their reviews, and it's not like this is a long game. No, it's actually really short. This game is basically a Rogue Squadron game, but with dragons. I know it gets a bit more complex than that, but that should give you a good idea of how the game works. Now, for those of you who don't know, the average Rogue Squadron mission takes around 5 to 10 minutes, this game not being an exception. Lair only has 15 missions, and that's including the optional training level. If you're good enough, you can literally beat this game within 3 hours, but first time going through, I would say it takes around 8. Anyway, the point is, I don't see Greg's reviews of Lair to be credible. The written review is a nightmare, and I actually have a hard time reading through it. The whole thing is basically just Greg shoving into your face that the game is severely flawed and you're an idiot if you disagree with him. And it's all because he can't pick up the toros off the bridge. I'm not joking, he obsesses over it. The video review isn't anywhere near as bad, but it's just badly supported for the most part. Though I will say this about the video review. His descriptions of the cutscenes and the music I can't argue with. The cutscenes really do look spectacular, and Lair has my second favorite soundtrack in a video game right under Turrican 2. But more importantly, his complaint about the controls being a bit unresponsive in this pursuit bubble mode is valid. The trick is to tilt the controller to either side, but the game tells you to move the controller in either direction, which won't do a freaking thing. I even complained about this in my review of the game. Again, like any game, it has its issues. There is no such thing as a perfect game. The problem is the complaints made by a vast majority of the critics aren't valid, and even if they are, they're backed up terribly. Most of them just jump onto the bandwagon only to frequently contradict themselves. The controls are bad. Why? Because they're unresponsive and oversensitive. But they're unresponsive, though they're oversensitive. The controls aren't bad, they're just impossible to use. Blah, 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 blah. Though I'm not a big fan of game trailers, and obviously I disagree with their opinions, I have to say that they did a good job on their review. Most of the complaints revolve around glitches and bugs that do exist, and they provide video evidence to expose so. For me, it's kind of nitpicking, and many of the problems they point out have been fixed in the update and patch, but their complaints are still valid. Then there's this comment on a forum I saw a month or two ago. Even though I actually liked the motion controls, as in I had few complaints with them, I didn't like the game overall because it felt like a reskinned Rogue Squadron. The gameplay felt way too similar and it didn't add enough to it. That too is a valid complaint, as it's based on a level of appeal. Oddly, the reason why this person doesn't like it is one of the main reasons I love it. But yes, I can see exactly what this guy is saying. You can go beyond that too. I'm not against people complaining about the game by any means. I just don't like how most of the complaining is due to several people just blindly jumping onto the bandwagon and saying what the other guy is saying without putting their own thought into it. It's usually either that or people complaining about how the game is too hard for them, and unfortunately, I've seen very few exceptions to that. Therefore, I see it as the most underrated game I've ever played, by far. When I bought it, I went in with neutral expectations. I was expecting mediocrity. What I got was another Rogue Squadron game with an entirely different setting, a greatly expanded battle system, and an incredible story. Well, this was a lot longer than I thought it would be. To conclude, I just want to make it clear that we are all entitled to our own opinions, though we should try to back up our opinions to the best of our ability. However, the most important thing I have to say is this: think for yourself. Make your own opinions. Whether you like something or not, it shouldn't be up to someone else, no matter who it is. This statement goes way, way beyond Lair. Don't just blindly take the popular opinion as your own. Think for yourself and make it clear that you do so. Though I have made the mistake of presenting my arguments in an overly aggressive manner, so I would be self-conscious about that. I am simply trying to stress that. I'm not trying to say that I'm better than anyone else, because I'm not. I'm just a 17-year-old trying to get through high school and into the game industry. I'm not a freaking god among men. I never will be. I'm just a geek who is not afraid to express his opinions. That's all. I want to be done with the subject for a while now, and I hope I don't have to bring it up again. Rants aren't my thing. I prefer to be a bit more positive. I hope you guys don't loathe my very existence any longer. I'm not going to force you to like my videos because that would be stupid. I just want to move on at this point.